Let's begin here in Nigeria. Lots of talk about economic growth. We got those 3.84% GDP Q4 2024 numbers, 3.40 for full year 2024. But some analysts think that Nigeria can grow at 5% under the Tinubu administration. Here is Tunji Andrews. He is the founder, CEO of Awaba, a fintech company. Here he is on a podcast with that projection.
And what's the number again?
3 points.
9 point, was it 3.4?
3.4.
Yeah, 3.4 or thereabouts. So Nigeria.
My new hot take.
Oh.
Another hot take.
Okay.
Before the end of this administration, we'll have a 5% GDP growth.
All right, is that possible? Let's talk about GDP growth. We got Esther Adegunle, Associate Director, Business and Economic Growth for DAI Nigeria, joining us from our Abuja studios. Good morning to you. Welcome to the show. So, what do you think? Can we hit 5% GDP growth within this administration's time in charge?
Good morning, Rotus. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. Yeah, very interesting question, right? It's 5%, the target for 2027. That's barely 2 years plus, because this year started already. Yeah, I think in answering this question, it's important for us to reflect back. Is this new for Nigeria? Would this be the first time, if we're able to achieve it, that Nigeria's GDP growth, is eating 5%? The answer is clearly no. Between 2000 and 2010, we're clearly at a high of about average 7%, sometimes eating 8%. Even if we just move further a little bit, between 2010 and 2014, if we want to call it the boom period, we actually averaged close to 7%, about 6.2%. But interesting to note that in 2010, we actually hit 8.01. Okay, so Nigeria has been there before. But what are the drivers to this economic growth that we saw in this period? There are a number of them. I'll mention a few of them. Firstly, oil and gas. So oil production was on the high. It was an average of about 2.2 million barrels per day. And also the oil prices were very favorable, at over $100 per barrel, right? So it was good times for us in terms of our revenue. Also in this period, there were a number of reforms, specifically in the financial sector. So we saw that sector gain confidence and attract a lot of investment. Thirdly, our dairy agriculture sector was really good. It was growing at a good rate and contributed to the growth that we experienced in that boom period. Fourthly, and almost the last, we saw the rise of telecoms, right? That was the period where, telecoms rose and contributed greatly to GDP growth. And finally, in that same period, we saw a rebase in 2014 of the GDP. So some of this actually contributed to the high GDP growth rate we saw in that period. If we fast track to this season, right, and you did mention it, last year we ended the year at a 3.4% GDP growth rate. This year there have been some predictions. So our CBN has gone up to say that expectation is that we'll end the year at a 4.1%, right, GDP growth. That's quite close to the 5%, right? The World Bank has been a little bit more conservative and has put a 3.6%. In this same year, we expect GDP rebasing. So I think it's possible if we're able to sustain some of our economic policies. And even more importantly, right, is just building that resilience that the economy needs, because there could be external shocks that are not within our control. But if we're able to build that resilience, we'll be able to, buffer it through. Thank you.
Excellent. Now, looking at the oil and gas sector, what do you make of some of the updates from Mr. Benga Komalafe of the Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, the NUPRC, with some of the, improvements made in the sector?
Yes, it was good to listen to him and see what he said regarding the oil and gas sector. Also, Madam Olu, the energy advisor, also spoke. I think it was an exclusive session on Arise TV on the same sector, right? Interesting times for the sector. This is what we have been clamoring for in terms of the increase in oil production. So some of the things he said was around that production has increased significantly from an average of 1 million barrels per day in 2021 to 1.75 million barrels per day. This is good. We need it to go further, right? So yeah, I think that we need to remember that the oil and gas sector is not necessarily a major contributor to GDP growth rates, okay? I like to think of it as an enhancer, because what that sector does for us is that it gives us the revenue in forex, foreign revenue that we actually need, okay, to bridge the gaps around infrastructure, right? So very important sector, contributing an average of about 5.5% last year to GDP growth, but it can be used to enhance the economy as a whole, right, in terms of infrastructure. I think an interesting one around it is the focus on gas, right? The boom period I spoke about like a decade plus ago, in that season, it was really just about gas flaring. But now, we're beginning to attract investment in the gas sector, right? The energy advisor, one of the things she said was we had attracted about 550 million USD in the gas sector just towards the end of last year. I think that's impressive. I think that gas certainly is what can help us with our economic diversification in terms of revenue, right?
All right, we had a little bit of a technical snafu there. We're going to try to fix that. But on the Global Business Report, we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Arise News. We have Esther Adegunle, of course, of DAI Nigeria with us in our Abuja studios. Apologies for that little technical snafu. I think we can jump. Your point is well made on the oil and gas sector in terms of its contribution to GDP and what we need to see in terms of production. I want to quickly jump to agriculture, not growing as fast as it should. 1% region. The government, however, is seeking some long-term investments, and these are the numbers here. Crop production, just under 2%. Livestock contracted by 4%. Forestry, 2%. Fishing contracted. So what's your outlook, I guess, for what needs to be done for agriculture to attract investment, boost output, and basically feed the nation?
Yeah, agriculture, AGS sector. Agriculture has always contributed above 20% to the Nigerian economy. Agriculture is where we have the jobs, right? Especially in the rural area. 70% of people are employed in this sector, even though sometimes the employment could be seasonal, right? Agriculture is like the backbone for the manufacturing sector. So we need to sort it out and sort it out quite fast. Government has pushed in a number of incentives. I think the very short wins that we need to put into the sector are, firstly, the security issues, right? Agric has been quite resilient over the decade, but we've seen it actually go down in terms of its growth rate, like you just mentioned. And one of the factors has been in terms of the security challenges, where farmers are not able to actually go to the farm and produce, where they are being threatened in so many ways, right? So very important to sort that out. I think you need to sort that out before you can seek long-term investment, because your investors are going to be looking at security, whether it's in Nigeria or any other sector, right? So that's something to be done. The value chain, the agricultural value chain, has a number of challenges, right? Another one is around just in terms of infrastructure. There's a high wastage. The last time I checked the figures, depending on the crop or the product, it was as high as 40%, right? We need to get that number low, okay, so that the farmers are not just producing, but ensuring that it gets to the final consumers like yourself and I. Agriculture promotes food security, right? So certainly, investors will come. I think that they will come when they see the right business environment, right? And the government is working towards that. So we need, despite all of the challenges, I think they are surmountable, and we want to see agriculture. We don't just want GDP to get to 5%. We want agriculture to also grow, because with agriculture growing at the rate it was growing before, we can actually surpass the 5% in 2027.
Now, manufacturing also isn't so hot in terms of real GDP growth. We know how important that is, how important it is as well, job creation and the like, and exports. What do we need there to galvanize the sector?
Yeah, so manufacturing is closely linked to agriculture, right? For manufacturing, the the contribution has always lingered around less than 10%. So last year was about 8%. But the growth was very small. It was about 1%, right? For manufacturing, there are a number of things. But you see, if I was to say 3 words, firstly, and I just had 3 words, it would be power, power, power. We certainly need to get our power right, okay? Many manufacturers spend a lot of their costs in power, right? We know many manufacturers that have closed shop and have left the country just because of that infrastructure gap of power. So I think that is something worth working on continuously, increasing the power generation, just working across the power value chain and ensuring that these manufacturers get power all across Nigeria. The second one will be just further integration with the agricultural sector, right? In manufacturing, even though the story looks gloomy, we've actually seen some manufacturing companies, local ones, do well, right? So if you take an example of production of sugar, interestingly, I now buy just locally produced sugar when I go to the supermarket, and that's because there are now a wide range of options. But if you look closely to their production chain, you realize that a number of their inputs are still imported from other countries. So if we link it back to agriculture, are there ways to incentivize sugarcane production in the agricultural sector such that it goes directly to the manufacturers of sugar that need it? So just looking at things along that line and going, promoting backward integration, I think it will save a lot of cost for the manufacturers and just ensure that the quality that they are getting from the local farmers is good, right? So yeah, manufacturing, those are some of the steps that we want to see in the manufacturing sector so that manufacturing can actually create the jobs that it's intended to create.
Fantastic. Now, yesterday the Naira closed at 1,499 per dollar. That's on the official market. Parallel market is at 1,510. So we've seen that gap really narrow on the back of what the Central Bank of Nigeria, its policies and everything. February was a very strong month for the Naira. How much does this play into a healthy economy in terms of currency stability?
Yeah, so the word is stability, right? And stability is that word in terms of the role that, the Naira plays, okay? I mean, if we look back, and you did mention, there have been a number of reforms there. If we look at some of the sectors that we've analyzed, the manufacturing sector at some point was bleeding because there was illiquidity in terms of getting foreign exchange, right? The dollars that was needed and all. So now all of those gaps are being, reduced, right? And so it's good time. 2 different areas, and I'll speak to the investors. Investors always look at the stability of your currency before they invest in the country, right? And just based on some of the reforms by CPN, we've seen that investment has actually increased in the country. So we want to see more of that because that adds directly to a more healthy economy in terms of feeding into our gross domestic product. Also, the other angle is just in terms of the producers, right? So for manufacturing, the businesses that require this, that require forex, the individuals also that need it for their own productive activities, right? It definitely feeds into it, right? So a healthy economy, you cannot separate a healthy economy from the state of its currency in terms of stability, not even necessarily the rates, but stability for planning, stability to attract investment.
Well said. So we've touched on oil and gas, we've touched on agriculture, manufacturing, the Naira. What else do you need to see to be confident that we can get to 5% or beyond in terms of economic growth?
Yeah, so we've covered all of these sectors. Of course, we want to also mention trade that is contributing to Nigeria's GDP. You want to, of course, mention services, right? Services is so key. But I would say just in terms of the policy, so it's really about policies. It's really about ensuring that the policies that we've brought up, the government has put in recent times are sustained, okay? Financial sector, we're beginning to, which is under services, we're beginning to see some reforms ongoing there. If we can sustain it and attract investment, perhaps it will take us to the boom period we saw that I mentioned earlier. But I want to actually look beyond GDP. Rotus were hopeful that the 5% in 2027 were able to meet it, right? But what happens after that is a question to consider. What happens in the long term? And as I was thinking about this, reflecting on two questions. The first is, do we have a healthy population in the labor force and a future healthy population? So how easy is it for people to actually access healthcare in Nigeria? Not you and I that, I have all of the big tertiary, hospitals, and we can go to the private hospitals, but actually those in the rural areas, actually children born in the villages and communities, right? That's our future labor force. They are the ones that will contribute to GDP in the coming years, right? How do we ensure that they have healthcare such that in 5, 10, 15 years from now, we're still able to sustain our growth? And the second, which is also very important in looking at our GDP growth, is education. There's a lot happening in the business world right now, and we need to ensure that our children have the level of education that is required for the future, just in terms of the skills that are required, digital skills and all. So it's very important that technology is infused into the educational system. It's very important that they even have access to education, right, wherever they are in the country. So yes, Rutus, hopefully we meet our 5% in 2027, but it's more important to look at the sustained development beyond GDP. Thank you.
Excellent wrap-up. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure having you on the show to share your insights on the Nigerian economy. Esther Adegunle, Associate Director, of course, for Business and Economic Growth at DAI Nigeria. Thank you so much.